All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of CRE with CBC Worldwide, where we explore the people and ideas shaping the future of commercial real estate. I'm your host, Josh Best, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Ginger Wilcox, president of Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate. Ginger's career is a masterclass in versatility. She has been an agent, a broker, a prop tech innovator, and now leads one of the most lifestyle driven brands in the industry. With a 360-degree view of real estate and leadership style grounded in trust, adaptability, and relevance, she's guiding BHGRE through a time of transformation with clarity and purpose. In this episode, we're going to talk about her journey, her leadership philosophy, and how she's helping agents and brokers thrive in this rapidly evolving market. So let's dive in. Ginger, anything we didn't cover in that intro that people need to know about you?
That was very comprehensive. I'm so happy to be here and share a little bit more about my journey and kind of where we're going.
Awesome. Well, very good. So start, just give us sort of the broad strokes of, whenever I ask folks this question, people will talk about, their history and what led them sort of to the moment that they're in now. And then maybe a little bit about what you envision as the future of your brand, your leadership. So just from a, 50,000 foot view, talk about how you got where you are and what you see as the future.
Sounds great. Well, real estate is really in my blood. I come from a real estate family. So, in some ways, I had no choice but to have it as part of my career path and journey. My grandfather was a developer and he built subdivisions in Arizona. So from an early age, that was something that I saw as part of the DNA of our family, and actually my parents met because my grandfather sold a lot to my dad's family. So it really started very early in our generation of how it came together. I ended up becoming an agent working with my mom when I was in college, and then like most multi-generation people decided that I needed to forge my own path. And I moved to San Francisco to the Bay Area and worked in high tech for a number of years. But eventually, over time, I felt this drawback to real estate. And I saw that there was an opportunity to kind of combine that legacy with my focus, which had been technology and innovation. I was actually an early employee at Trulia and had an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time there helping think about how we changed the industry. And that has been a key a key, moment for me that's really driven where I've gone with my career and being able to think about how do we continue to innovate in this space while also kind of shaping and taking advantage of the past that helps drive us every day. When you ask the question of where are we going, one of the reasons I was inspired by coming to BHGRE is this ability to work for a brand that's 100 years old and be able to continue to think about how do you make that brand continue to be fresh and relevant and really innovate in the real estate space while taking advantage of that legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it's an interesting time for sure for the company and sort of their trajectory. And I've worked with a number of companies who have gone through a similar evolution of having that pivotal moment of where they really decided who they were going to be as an organization. And so it's awesome that you're at the forefront of that. Did you have a similar experience in leadership where you decided like, yes, leadership is for me. I don't just want to be an expert doer. I want to be a leader of teams and organizations.
Well, my mom would say that I was always the leader. And I was always trying to take charge. So I would say that it's in some cases like it's always been there, and
Yeah.
I think you have people that gravitate towards leadership positions. But I was very fortunate that early in my career I had the opportunity to take on leadership positions. Probably before I was ready, I had a great person by the name of Paul McKnight that I worked with. I was working at a telecommunications company at the time, and we were in high growth mode. We were doing lots of mergers and acquisitions, and every time there was sort of a problem assignment, he would assign it to me. And through that, I had the opportunity to. One point, I was managing, and I was 23 years old, managing a 300-person call center
Wow.
in Garden City, New Jersey. I've kind of done a little bit of everything, and through that experience, I always found that I enjoyed leading people through change and through challenge, and that's been a hallmark of my career.
Yeah. That's there's different styles and approaches to leadership, and I would imagine there's probably some core that you've kept, but you've led in a wild array of industries and backgrounds and numbers of people. So How do you decide what's right for the moment and what is truly like your core leadership philosophy?
I have to say that I love organizations that are changing and evolving, and that really drives some of the decision making of the places that I've had the opportunity to be able to lead to. I tend to be very mission focused, and when there's something that's interesting or exciting for me on a place that I'm able to take people to, I think that helps drive where I go. It's it's interesting to be a leader that is sort of, I hate the word change agent, but it is probably been a hallmark of my career that I've tended to be in places where there's change, and I think that comes from being really comfortable with uncertainty and thinking about how I can constantly evolve what wherever I go next, and that's been sort of a hallmark. How it changes how I lead is interesting because as a leader, people are very resistant to change, and that is something that I've had to learn over the years on how to make sure that as I'm comfortable with change, I recognize that not everyone is, and that I think about how to bring people along on that journey.
Yeah. I want to talk a little more about that because commercial real estate is an industry that, in many ways, innovates, ahead of our competitors. And then there are other ways where we would prefer to do business, maybe like they still did 100 years ago in some of those transactions. So, how do you work to get someone that is uncomfortable with change on board, or at least less skeptical about it?
Well, I think it has to come with a why first, and oftentimes when there's change that's happening, there's small groups of people that are focusing on it. You don't have everybody involved in those decisions, and you can't because you would never actually facilitate change if you're leading by committee. But what has been really important for me as I've looked to drive change in my career is thinking about how do you make sure that people understand what is the mission you're on and get them bought into where you're going versus the tactics. And I think that that's where change sometimes is really hard because people think that it's tied back to, well, we want this goal, we want this outcome, whatever that might be, whether it's growth. Most people don't transform for transformation's sake, but you have to be getting people bought into the ultimate goal and not the tactics. And I think that's where I've been successful is being comfortable with pivoting tactics in order to be able to achieve that sort of ultimate outcome. You have to bring people along through different phases of that journey. And then you have to recognize sometimes that not everybody is going to come along. And that can be hard, but it's certainly part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the some of the coaching work that I do, I talk a lot about that idea of thinking about the overall health of the system versus the day-to-day tactics.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I see leaders struggle with, especially, in our field at our even at our highest levels, our leaders are still out in the streets and doing deals, right? And
Yeah.
and maybe they're not as focused on that vision. And I think it's next level skill for leaders to be able to paint vision and talk about what's possible. So when you came into BHGRE, how did you go about assessing where it was and then defining for them what was possible?
It started with talking to people and understanding what their pain points are. And when you think about when you think about future innovation, it has to start with where are people at and what's their challenges. There's this concept in technology development called design thinking, and it's something that has been a powerful tool that I've used not just from a technology development perspective, but when thinking about strategic changes that are happening in an organization. And what it does is it focuses on the the human challenge that people may be having, whether it's a leader, whether it's an agent, and then coming up with solutions that are not about doing things the way that you've always done it, but tackling the core issue that is faced. And I think you can get people bought into a something that's different when you can explain to them, would you be happy if we were able to solve this problem for you? So when I came into Better Homes and Gardens real estate, we were at a place where we had a lot of our companies and our owners and our agents were struggling in their businesses. Margins have been compressed in this industry, and they needed to start thinking about things differently. And they were used to a certain level of service, certain tools, certain people within the brand that they were very tied to people versus tied to what that actually delivered for their business. And so you starting with starting with their challenge is the best way to be able to bring people along in that process.
Mhm. That's good. And for our listeners, just a couple of quick notes for you to jot down as you're hearing us here. So two schools of thought to look further into. One, design thinking out of the technology space, and Ginger mentioned early in the call that that's where she sort of came from and got some of her roots, was in that rapid development technology space. So a great philosophy on approaching change and setting vision for your company can come from that design thinking space. And then also systems thinking. They're kind of partners in the same way of thinking in your organization. And in the liner notes for this episode, we'll link a couple of articles that'll help you sort of explore those concepts. So make sure you click into the liner notes there. I say liner notes like I'm reviewing an album from 1974. Dating myself a little there, but so Ginger, one of the things that is I think universally seen in, I don't know if it's just your approach as the leader of Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate, or if this existed and you've just capitalized on it, but this idea of mentorship and growth through leveraging the great knowledge in your network. Is that a passion for you, or was that something you discovered coming into this organization?
I would say that it's a passion in part because of where I've come from. I was really fortunate. My very first job, I had this incredible mentor, and I would say it went beyond mentorship to sponsorship. And he's been part of my life for my entire career. And he challenged me constantly to think differently, to do differently, to not be afraid to take positions that maybe I was not ready for at times. And then I had sort of a void in my career where I didn't have that, and when you have that great experience right out of the bat, you're always sort of looking for who's that next person going to be, and that has really shaped my leadership. I, at times, can be a tough leader to my teams because I had wanted for so long in my career for somebody that would continue to push me and drive me as well. But I think that that has been impactful because I like to see sometimes what people can't see in themselves and help them find that and be able to achieve, I hate the kind of the term the best outcome, but I think it's meaningful when you have somebody that can see where you can go when you might have your own kind of scotoma or blinders on for that. And I think it goes beyond my teams. That's something I like to do with people that I mentor throughout the industry as well.
Yeah. When you're doing that, because that's a really interesting concept, when you are working with somebody that you see potential, they don't necessarily see that themselves. You're driving them maybe harder than they think is necessary, or I guess presenting some motivation that they didn't see. How do you how do you build the context for that? Because I can imagine the intent and impact there have the potential to not be aligned, right? Of
Correct.
what is
Correct.
she doing to me? Why is this happening to me? So how do you have that conversation around setting the right expectations for what it's going to be like with you as a leader?
I think it's something that I do set out from day one when I'm talking to people and I'm interviewing them and making sure that we're aligned, and I try to explain my why so that they understand some of the how, but it also can come in play in just specific conversations. Recently, I had a woman who had worked with me at a previous organization, and she reached out to me because she was interested in a role on our team. And she I jumped on the phone with her and we were having a conversation, and I was asking her why she was interested in the role, and she was going to ultimately go on to, I wasn't the hiring manager, it was somebody else on the team, was ultimately going to go on to them. And at the end of kind of her spiel, I stopped her and I said, "Can I give you some honest feedback?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "It might be harsh." And she said, "That's okay." And I said, "I would not hire you based on how you just sold me.
Wow.
And I think you're so much better, and I'd love for you to be able to really tell your story." This was a really interesting woman who had started a nonprofit at a very early age based on some personal life circumstances. She'd done all of these incredible things, but she was reading her resume rather than telling her story. And she took that. She went back and she said, I'm going to recraft my story." And she gave it to me, and it was so much better, and I hope that that has the impact that she's looking for, whether she ends up at our organization or somewhere else, because we often undersell ourselves.
Yeah. I really like that approach of don't just give me your resume, tell me your story. And I think that translates not just to, the interaction that you had, but also, people relate to stories. We tell our
Yeah.
realtors all the time, tell a story, build emotion in your sale, right? So
Yes.
being able to do that for yourself and build your brand that way, that's really interesting.
I think that storytelling is such a gift, and we actually at our company event that we did, which we called the Better Retreat last year, we brought in a storytelling expert to talk to our organization, to all of the broker owners and agents about how to tell their story because we do tend to come in and say, "I've done this, I've sold this building, I've sold these houses," and it's not telling the times that we negotiated something that went beyond the norm and how we were able to save somebody a significant amount of money or solve a pain point. And that becomes really powerful when you're trying to get somebody to work with you. They don't care that you sold X or Y. They care that you're able to solve something unique for them. And I think that's been a big part of how I've been able to drive companies to be successful by diving into sort of that unique story.
Yeah. And I think that's another important point, especially for our commercial focused listeners in the audience of, we talk about commercial being this business that is built on logic and justified with logic. And I think there is more room to build on emotion and justify with logic, like we see in a more traditional residential setting. And so, an interesting practice. What was the result of that better retreat activity? Did you see better storytelling coming out of it?
I saw incredible storytelling, not just from our brokers and agents, but even from our staff at the organization who saw an opportunity to be able to do something different. And I want to dive into what you just said. Data can tell a powerful story, but if you just show what the data is, it's it's missing context. And so understanding what that data is something we do every day. We actually have some really unique data insights as part of our relationship with Dash Meredith, the publisher of Better Homes and Gardens magazine. And that's a key differentiator that we have as a brand for our agents, and they're able to take that data and be able to use it to tell a story, to be able to make decisions better or help their clients understand how to make decisions better. So data is important, but it's not useful unless you tell the story behind it.
Yeah, that was in my first sales role, that was the phrasing that was always drilled into my head is people buy on emotion, justify with logic. So you have to have the data, but the data tells us what happened yesterday and what has potential to happen tomorrow, and the link between those 2 is the story that we tell, right? And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, so I think that's another good note for our listeners. Um, so when you think about where we are as an industry, real estate, we get reactions right now in the range of the sky is falling all the way through. This is a great time to capture market share when we come out the other end, all the way to, we have a couple brokers that are having their most successful years ever. So
Yep.
with that range, how are you communicating about our industry right now from a leadership perspective?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I've been in this business for a very long time, multiple decades, and there's always a sky is falling moment. There's right? It could be what's happening in the market, it could be a new technology that's coming out. There's always something that is going to kill our industry, and yet we continue to adapt and evolve and survive. And so I think it starts with that it doesn't matter what's coming. We have to build sort of that core competency of being capable of uncertainty and then what do you do with whatever comes at you? Because, we just went through this period where we had lawsuits and there's questions on commissions and what's going to happen with the role of the agent. Now we have AI and AI is going to eliminate everybody. But it's not because we adapt and we evolve and we think about how do we use these tools, how do we use what's happening in the market to be able to change and do something differently. So that's my focus with my organization is how do we prepare to be comfortable with change and be able to adapt quickly because things are changing much quicker now. We can't have remember we used to do like 5 and 10-year plans and it was like set in stone. You have to be able to adapt on a monthly basis right now. That doesn't mean you don't have a long-term vision, but I think that comfort with adaptation and change is a core skill set that we need to really build within our organizations.
Yeah. How I think you mentioned this earlier, and it's been a theme so far that we've been talking is just your real comfort and agility with change, not only experiencing it, but being able to lead through it and communicate it. It's not a skill that everybody possesses.
Right.
So what specifically have you done to sort of build that skill set?
I don't I you know, to I'm very lucky. I that comfort with change has been something that has been part of my DNA, and I know that that is helpful. What isn't part of most organizations' DNA is that everyone is in that same space, and so it goes back to ensuring that people are, actually, I've been talking a lot to my team about this concept of being strong at the core, that you have to understand and be really good at the foundations or the core of your business, of even your own mindset in order to be able to adapt to change. Because if you're not, it's I do yoga, so I like to think about it as within yoga. If you don't understand and if you don't have that strength in your core, you're not gonna be able to do lots of different poses, and it's a true business. If you have a rocky center, then when change hits, you're gonna be knocked off, but, what if you think about it even like a home foundation, a home foundation when you have a hurricane that comes through, a home that's anchored in that foundation, that has the core, is able to withstand much better than one that doesn't, and that's true of any of our businesses, and so understanding what that looks like in your business, in your people, in their mindset, and making sure that they're solid in the good times makes it much easier to adapt to change in the longer term.
Yeah. Yeah, that I had a leader, Bill Emerson, that used to always say that once we know who we are, the decision-making process gets easier.
Yes,
And that came from that firm foundation, that core, but also the organizational culture that was built around that, almost as like what holds up and what reinforces the core. So
exactly.
at BHGRE, you have really worked to build a culture there since you've come on board. Can you talk about a little bit of your philosophy? Because I think that is another thing that people are missing is how to build a strong culture in their organization. So what are your viewpoints on building culture?
Building culture is critical, and it was interesting coming into Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate because we had these core principles, with around how the organization was going to uh, align with, and they were an acronym called PAGE, which is for passion, authenticity, inclusion, excellence, and growth. And I analyzed that, and some people encouraged me to change the core values and make them my own. And as I dove into the conversations with my brokers, with our staff, with our agents, what I saw was that core value was actually pretty deeply embedded already. But what needed to change was not necessarily the words, but the meaning of what was behind them. And so it kind of goes back to this idea of evolving for the future. I like to say true icons, and Better Homes and Gardens is certainly an icon brand, have to constantly evolve. So it's how do you take those core fundamentals? We think about quality when people think about Better Homes and Gardens, they quality has been a hallmark of the brand for over 100 years. So what does that mean in order to deliver quality today versus what it did 10 years ago? And for us, that has meant, for example, moving from print to digital, which has been a big deal. We used to be only in a magazine, and now we had to think about how do we take the magazine and then translate that to a digital experience that's much, much different. So it starts with having that very deep core values that drive the organization, but then think about how do you evolve the meaning behind them in order to be able to drive to today. And so that is a part of our everyday planning process is this in alignment with our core values? How do we continue to focus on ways to ensure that people understand this is about growth, this is about excellence, this is about passion for home, but then how do we evolve the tactics, the way we think about that throughout the organization? And I think it's made it very clear because the core values were already there. We just continue to think about how do we change them for where we're going?
Yeah. So I'm gonna challenge you, maybe challenge you with this question, but a lot of our leaders are right in the middle of this right now, and they're thinking about this for their teams. We're past halfway through 2025, and they're thinking about how do I do this. So we've talked a lot about the philosophy. Let's say tomorrow you've opened GW Consulting. You go into you're watching our leaders operate. What are tactically the first couple of steps you recommend to help someone build a change focused culture in their organization?
Oh, great question. Uh, well, I think it would start with helping people get bought into where you're going. And that's alignment at the very fundamental levels around the company's guiding principles and mission. And then what are your objectives? So I use the OKR method, which has been used by LinkedIn and Google and other companies, which is about creating core objectives that start at the top, but it comes into everybody's goals throughout the organization. It was actually one of the first things I did at Better Homes and Gardens because we were pretty siloed when I started, and people knew what they were doing within their own area, but that didn't necessarily translate into how does training and marketing and service and technology support the core business objectives and where we needed to go? But by aligning every single person in the organization's goals around the corporate objectives, we were able to create a mindset that enabled them to get beyond what they'd always done and think about how is what I'm doing going to be able to drive the results that the organization is looking for. So I think it starts with that is what you defining where you're going, defining what you want to do, and ensuring that every person, it does not matter what level in your organization, understands what is that top goal and how does the work that I do, the meaningful work that I do every single day actually impact that? Because so often people don't feel like the work that they do is actually related to it. Like how do I retain a franchise affiliate as a customer service associate? Well, we're able to show that, and I think I would start with that.
Yeah. And listeners, you're hearing this podcast from two folks who are advocates for the OKR system. We just did at our CBC conference a whole session on building cascading OKRs inside of your organization from for your sales folks and your leaders and things like that. And so that's another thing we'll include. We'll put a link in the notes to go and check out some resources on if you wanted to start using that system in your organization, because it's incredibly powerful. And to Ginger's point, it really makes people feel connected to the work. And I think that is a big issue is the work I do doesn't connect to that culture
Yeah.
or that thing we're trying to build. Um, when it comes to that idea of feeling connected and feeling like you're a part of it, some folks, you mentioned this earlier, just aren't going to be on board with where an organization is going or trying to go or the culture they're trying to build. What is your approach to, I guess the phrasing that I've heard before is coach up versus coach out? Like, how do you
Yeah.
make the determination that the best option for that team member is gonna be another organization?
Well, I would say that in some ways it ties back to your OKRs, and part of your OKRs need to include an element that's related to people and how you're managing people. It also needs to include an element around culture if culture is really important to you. And so defining what that means for each individual on the team, it becomes very clear if somebody's not bought into the culture as you're doing that goal setting with them, and that creates opportunities for conversation. I've never been afraid of having challenging or tough conversations with people on the team because if somebody's not bought into the culture, they're probably not happy there. And that doesn't mean that they can't be happy and satisfied and fulfilled in their career somewhere else. So I think it starts with defining, you know, what is the missing sort of alignment there, and then having that conversation. It could be that there's a moment in time for what is happening in their life where something has changed, but you don't know until you have that, and it's really powerful to be able to help somebody find something that they can be passionate about somewhere else. I like to say that nobody should ever leave our organization and be surprised, because you should be having those conversations, and it's about being human and being empathetic, but creating that alignment through the defined sort of goals and processes that we set as leaders.
Yeah. The in just the conversation with you so far, I'm picking up, so in my work with leaders, there have been folks that their approach is, if we get our people right, the tasks will take care of themselves. And then the other side, by doing task well, our people will form good relationships. You seem to sort of be able to flex between both of those. And how do you make the determination when it's time to be task focused versus when it's time to be people, even if that shift is by 51%, right?
That's a great question. There is no question that having the right people on board really changes an organization, and it was one of the first things that I did when I came to this organization is make sure that we had both the right people, but the right alignment. But at some points, you just have to get tactical as well, and especially when you're in moments of big change. I have a vivid memory of going through. going through COVID, and at the time, I was 5 weeks into a role where I was leading a very large organization. It was 3rd largest wholesale lender in the country, and the day that they started shutting down the country, we had $6 billion of loans in our pipeline, and we had to go, "What are we going to do?" We weren't sure, and then we also had a huge portfolio of customers that we service their loans, about 400,000 people, and the question was, are they even going to be able to pay their bills? What if they can't go to work? How are they going to get paid? So we had to shift to tactical mode. I didn't have time at that point, 5 weeks in, I didn't have my team in place. People didn't know me. I was new to the organization, and you just have to go, "All right, we have to get in a bunker. We have to figure out how we're going to do this," and you move forward tactically, and then you have to adapt as you go along. So sometimes that's just driven by the business circumstances that you're in.
Hmm. When you plan for your week, what does that look like? This is again on the sort of tactic side, but you're sitting down, whether it's Sunday night or whenever you plan Friday the week before. What sort of metrics are you looking at, and then what's driven by your gut when you're doing that weekly planning?
I have so many requests on my time, and I know we all do, that I have to look at my calendar very carefully and make sure that the activities that are on it are in alignment with the goals that we're trying to achieve. I have certain time blocks that I set that are non-negotiables for me. So, for example, calls to our affiliated brokers is a big part of that. If I'm not talking to our brokers, I don't understand what's happening in the network. I can't continue to make strategic decisions. So that becomes very important. The one-on-ones that I have with my senior leadership are also non-negotiables. Sometimes they end up changing where they're at or when they're at. I actually do a lot of walking meetings with my team where I'm walking my dog and getting out of the house, but also being able to have a conversation. But I constantly am adjusting my calendar to make sure that those non-negotiables sort of fit into it and that I'm able to be really ruthless about where I spend my time because that's an important space. I don't do much with email. My team knows that I don't really read email. They have to use different tools in order to be able to communicate with me because I hear this thing all the time. Well, I've got to go do email. Email is not a thing we do. There is no value in that time. And so I think we have to think about our time and where we spend it very strategically. And sometimes that means just saying no to attending, the myriad of things that we could be asked to do in any given day or week.
Yeah. And folks, listeners, I want to stress that point that Ginger just made because I think it's maybe if you take nothing else away from this conversation, that is a really important point for anybody that is in leadership is you have to be 100% in control of your time. You have to decide what your priorities are, and then you have to the word she used was ruthless. You have to be ruthless with your approach to protecting your priorities. And so many times I see leaders get into this bar fight mentality in the day when really what they should be focused on is what is the tactical, and like it should be a boxing match and not a bar fight, right? Like that has
Yeah.
to be the approach to the day.
Yep.
Um, that's fantastic. Thank you for all of that. I think my last official question here, as we sort of come into the end of our time, if you were sitting down with yourself, as you were starting to that 23-year-old that you said you got a leadership position and maybe weren't prepared for it, what is the philosophy that you would impart to them, or the guiding principles you would give them?
I would say don't wait for permission. S take the opportunities. If the opportunity doesn't exist, find a way to make it happen. Um, because that has been a hallmark of my career. I've never waited for permission. I've decided where I wanted to go, and then I found a way to get there, and that comes from that ruthless prioritization of time. It also comes from a relentless focus on achieving what you're trying to do, and it doesn't mean my path has been linear, by the way. I think that there's, constantly sort of turns and evolutions in anything that you do, but if you stay bought into where you wanna go, eventually you're going to get there, and so don't wait for somebody to hand it to you, just go take it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Again, thank you for being with us. A couple of just key anchor points for our listeners. Make sure that you're looking at what is your balance and priority around your time? What is your balance and priority around your task versus relationship focus of the day? And then how are you relentlessly pursuing those people-driven goals that help your people stay connected to your organization? Because doing those things are going to help you move in a direction that is positive. It might not always be the quickest, it might not be as slow as you are hoping for some days, but you will continue making positive progress towards those goals. So, Ginger, any parting thoughts, words, or where might people connect with you if they want to continue to follow your journey?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Ginger Wilcox. If they want to see more about Better Homes and Gardens, I'm also on Instagram, Ginger W. I share a lot about our journey there as well.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thanks again for being with us and taking the time. We really appreciate it. And I know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.